Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I thought I'd talk about the F-14A because recently I went from stock to spaded in it. Basically I grinded it out without using GE, without using anything like that, and I thought I'd go through my general feelings on it and how it seems to perform, at least in the hands of mine. When it comes to the F-14, the reason why I decided to spade it was actually not really because of the vehicle itself, but because of something that Gaijin added, which is new, that we've never seen before. So for a loading screen, you actually needed to play 100 missions at 70% activity in the F-14, and I decided I wanted to go for that, since it was a new idea. If they decide to do that for future updates, where they put loading screens behind little challenges, I'll be completely fine with it. It gave me a new reason to play a vehicle that I had no real intention of playing, and also a BR bracket that I didn't really have an intention of touching either when it came to the new update. Now, looking at the vehicle itself, so the F-14A, I spent 160 battles in it to spade it, 65% win rate, 300 air kills, and 106 deaths. Made 1.54 million SL. So it did technically pay for itself at the end of it if you take away the crew skill, but in order for this to be, let's call it SL efficient, I'd have to probably play another 20, maybe 40 or 60 games to be able to pay off itself, since the vehicle just gets better and better and better with time. If we're being honest, obviously in Aerialistic, which is where I played it, you can kill AIs, which count towards your service record. Since I actually record every single kill that I got, I actually ended up with 245 kills. So it was basically 245 player kills versus 106 deaths. So basically 2.5 to 1, about 2 to 1 with the vehicle itself. What I found with the vehicle is, as I progressed on, it became easier and easier to play. Not a surprise. When we started playing the machine, before we got a lot of the modifications, we were going at a 1-to-1 rate. Then, by the time we got to around about 60 deaths, we were at about 120 air kills to 60. And then from that, we went to 300 to 106. So basically, to a 2-to-1 ratio, went to 60. And then for about 40 deaths, we got another 200 kills. So at a spaded performance, the F-14 is incredibly good compared to its more standard stock performances. The other thing is this vehicle has a ton of really cool skins on the War Thunder Live, so we went through a bunch of them as well, which was pretty cool and quite nice. Now, comparing it to its competition, the F-14 is obviously the best plane in the game. I think it was a little bit overblown when it comes to when it was introduced. It still is not something that just wipes the floor with everything else. You still actually have to use your brain, but also at the same time, it is very powerful and it works incredibly well. In a stock configuration, though, when it doesn't have countermeasures, when it doesn't really have missiles, when it doesn't have anything like that, it was actually pretty rough to play for the first about 50 matches. The only time I actually felt like I was combat effective in this thing was when I unlocked the AIM-9Gs and AIM-7Fs. I went Flares Chaff for the first modification, then AIM-9Ds, then AIM-9Gs and AIM-7E, and then AIM-7F, AIM-9H, and then I went for the performance upgrades. And after getting the performance upgrades, then the gun upgrades, then the AIM-54A, and then the rockets and the bombs, and then finally the new boosters, since this plane has a bit of a tendency to fall apart in a turn, and I didn't want to push it too far. So that was my general spading area. The way that I actually researched the F-14 was they added a lot of vehicles, they gave a lot of vehicles napalm in the last update for War Thunder, so I just kind of respaded all of them, and also played and spaded the F-3H Demon, and got halfway through the AV-8C. So that's how I was able to unlock the F-14. It didn't take too long, maybe like a day or 2 days to unlock the F-14, but to actually spade the F-14, it took about 4 days. I probably could have done it a bit quicker, but to be honest, I didn't want to. I wanted to try and take a little bit of time with it, and because I knew it would be a little bit of a burnout thing while spading this thing, especially since half the time I was playing it, I would be nowhere near combat effective, especially since I didn't have the performance upgrades. I did also expert the crew on this thing. Usually I don't expert crews on vehicles because of the fact that I don't play them as much as others. Usually I spade a vehicle and then kind of leave it, but I knew since this was an end-of-the-line vehicle, I was going to end up, spading it and probably never touching it again, but it was going to take me longer to spade. And when it comes to the ace crew qualification, I experted it about halfway through the grind, and the crew experience with the selected vehicle that we got was 396,000 RP. So a lot of RP in this vehicle was got. So in the stock configuration, when you have no countermeasures, when you only have access to 2 AIM-9Ds, you are very, very rough in this vehicle. Its engines still feel very powerful when stock, but overall you do not have the acceleration. You do not have a way to defend yourself, which is very important in the F-14 since the engines burn very hot, and it means that even with countermeasures, you have to turn off the afterburner to be able for the missiles to miss. If you don't have the countermeasures, then you just kind of die. Basically what I did was I stayed low. I went for head-ons, I went for AIs, I tried to do anything I could to just get myself access to some mod RP so I could get access to the countermeasures. Once I got the countermeasures, I did the same thing, and then I used the AIM-9Ds and researched the AIM-9Ds, and then went on to the AIM-7Es to give myself a little bit of support. There was a time period when I had unlocked the AIM-7Es in this thing and the AIM-9Gs, where I felt like I was starting to get the hang of it, meaning that I was actually, becoming a little bit competent in the vehicle, but that was shot to pieces for maybe 20 to 30 battles because the playstyle I was using just wasn't working for the vehicle. What I was trying to do was I was trying to use the AIM-7Es effectively by kind of going quite low and then shooting upwards with the radar, and then using them and then trying to attack with AIM-9Gs from afar, since AIM-9Gs have a long burn time. So, attacking from 3.5 to 4 kilometers is sometimes really good in them, especially if you're going from above. But the problem was, what ended up happening is as I was going upwards into the battle, usually I would get caught as somebody coming down or somebody coming from below me, and I would just completely miss them. So this was a constant issue in the vehicle. So what I started doing, especially when I was researching the AIM-7F, is I actually started going from up high and kind of just having the confidence where I could win the air battle against the other people who had gone high. So I started the battle instead of 1 to 2K, which is generally what seems to be the way that people, whenever I watch videos on stuff like this, that's what they talk about, trying to go low to watch out for semi-actives and then go from there. I decided instead what I'm going to do is kind of do the opposite. So climb to about 5 to 7K, have the confidence that with my radar, I could win the high altitude battle, and then from there, push down onto the enemy and then support those guys who had engaged in that dogfight area. And it actually worked pretty well with the F-14. That's where the vast majority of my kills came from. So what I would do is I would go to the edge of the battle, maybe 30 to 35 kilometers away from the standard battle. I would turn into the battle. I would use the radar in search PD mode, usually, to see if there was anybody at my level or below, because I knew there was going to be nobody higher than me. And then if there was somebody at my level, I would engage them with AIM-7s and then force them down with either the radar locks or the AIM-7s themselves. And then after that, once that superiority was got from that altitude, I would then drop down and then assist allies with whoever they were dogfighting. This worked the vast majority of the time. It was actually a pretty good playstyle for the F-14. The only thing I had to watch out for was if other people were using their semi-actives, such as the AIM-7Fs or the AIM-54s, and against the AIM-54s, it was pretty easy to deal with. I ran mixed, so I ran chaff and flares, and using chaff, the AIM-54s were useless, but against stuff like the AIM-7Fs, they were a lot more deadly. I had to do the classic turn into them and then turn away, basically turn straight forward to them. A lot of people I see, what they do is they dive straight down to try and get rid of the AIM-7s. That won't work. They'll just follow you down. What you have to do is you have to kind of push into it and then turn away, or you have to turn into where it is turning from. So if it's turning from, let's say, the left-hand side into you, you have to turn to the right and basically overload more than the missile can take. So it has to fully recorrect to turn around. And that's how you deal with stuff like AIM-7s. But a lot of people, what they did is they just went straight down, and if you go in a straight line, the AIM-7 is just going to follow you. Like it's going to be as simple as that. So I became really confident with dealing with the high-tier fights, especially with the radar. The radar was temperamental quite a lot of the time, I'm not going to lie. But when it worked well. I stopped launching AIM-7s past 20 kilometers. Basically, I would launch one AIM-7 at 20 kilometers and one AIM-7 at 10 kilometers, and those would be the two launches I would do during a high altitude airfight. And then what you could also do with the AIM-7s with the PD radar is, as you went down, if somebody saw you coming down, then you could lock them with the radar and use the AIM-7 as kind of a front missile to hit them, because it was decently maneuverable. I will say this is all with the 7F. The AIM-7E felt like trash. It was nowhere near as good as the AIM-7F. The difference between the E and the F is like night and day. The F is way more maneuverable. It can go way further as well, and it just feels kind of what I would class a semi-active radar homing missile to be. It was really good at tracking the target. It had a very good snap on it. It reacted to the radar very well. There wasn't many times where the AIM-7F struggled. The AIM-7E was absolutely crap. It was just terrible when it came to using it. So I would definitely never use those damn things. The other thing as well is the radar worked very well when a plane was coming towards you, but it did not work well at all if the plane was going away from you. And the problem with this was the fact that if you were chasing a target, or if somebody knew what they were doing, what they would do, because also an AIM-7F is terrible at tracking something that's going away from it. It's only really good at tracking it if it's coming towards it. So if a person knew what they were doing against something like the F-14, and you were radar locked by it, and you were for a while, and you knew a missile was coming in, just turn away from the aircraft. The missile will get confused, and it will just disappear somewhere. That's how you deal with that stuff, even if your chaff isn't working against, breaking the radar lock. So that was super easy to deal with as well. I didn't use the AIM-54 much. I felt like even though the range was really nice, the matches or the maps themselves are just not big enough. And what was more useful to me was the maximum overload of the AIM-7F. I can understand the Phoenix being useful. On the larger maps in EC, I feel like they'll be good for donking. I feel like they'll be good for donking AI and stuff like that, but at the same time, the AIM-7F it has that combat capability of hitting things from about 30 kilometers away anyway, and also at the same time, it just has way more maneuverability. So I think the combo that you do is the AIM-7F and the AIM-9H. Now, I haven't talked too much about the AIM-9H because it's a very good missile, but it's really similar to the AIM-9G. It basically just doesn't care as much about flares, so it's another long-range Sidewinder. Not like something like a J, but much more of a, well, let's call it a slow burner, but it's very quick to the target. That's why I think launching them for about 3.5K, obviously depending on where the enemy is looking, is the way to go. But the combo of the AIM-7F and the AIM-9H was really, really nice. It meant that you could engage from range in both scenarios, and then if you needed to go close, well, you had the 20mm, which is really good, high fire rate, and also, you know, can do a ton of damage. For me, though, I think a better combo would have actually been R60s or R60Ms with this thing, or Magics, just because I think that better overload would mean that you could go in, hit kills, and then get out quickly. I saw a lot of Mirage F1Cs and F1CTs doing that very effectively when it came to the higher echelons, and I feel like the F-14 could benefit from something like that. So even though, you know, it has these longer range sidewinders, I would actually prefer it to have more maximum overload sidewinders to catch people more off guard, because I feel like the setup you could do in the thing once you get the engine upgrade and the G suit was really nice on the F-14. So maybe the long range stuff wasn't really required. Maybe a shorter range thing would have been better. But still, I've got to say, the loadout I was running, which was Bongo Town, it was 4 AIM-9Hs and 4 AIM-7Fs. Fantastic. I couldn't have asked for a better thing for the F-14 that's available right now. So the AIM-9Ds were alright. They were a good starter. The AIM-9Gs was where the sidewinders started actually becoming useful, and the AIM-9Hs are just a slightly improved AIM-9G, so they were really good as well. The only time I felt like this thing wasn't great was when I was running AIM-9Ds, AIM-7Es, because the AIM-7Es were trash, and the AIM-9Ds, you know, people actually flare, which is quite, you know, which is quite useful at high tiers. The vast majority of competition I faced was MiG-23s and Mirage F1Cs, funnily enough. There was a few other vehicles in there, Phantoms like F4Js, and obviously since the F-14's pretty popular right now, I faced a lot of American F4Js, F-14As, you know, even F4Es. And I felt like the only things that I struggled against was the F-14, the F-14A itself, the MiG-23 MLD, I think it is, which is the Soviet top-tier vehicle, because it's actually faster than the F-14, and then also the Mirage, the F-1C or the F-1CT. That thing has crazy missiles that you have to be super careful of, and since it actually changed my playstyle a little bit, I actually started running flares reinforced, so it fired like 2 flares at the same time instead of taking any chaff, because I wasn't getting killed by really any semi-actives. I was just getting killed by Mirages with stuff such as their IRs, and same with the MiG-21s and MiG-23s. And since this thing was burning a lot of fuel and burning really fast, it meant that, you know, had very large flames on the back of it. So even if I cut the engine and, you know, started flaring, it wasn't always enough to stop Magic 2s and other crazy missiles. I saw a few Chinese vehicles. They seemed really good. Like the JAB, I saw that a few times, but I feel like the missiles really carry that thing quite hard. All of its other abilities were just very suboptimal compared to the F-14. Now, the biggest issue I had with the F-14, actually, as a vehicle, was ripping its damn wings. I don't know whether it is something to do with the F-14 itself, because in real life it did have a few issues. Like, Rocker actually showed me a video of a F-14 buzzing a carrier, and then it went for a turn, and then it exploded. So it just went pop. But I don't know whether it's to do with its historical things, or if it's to do with the way that the variable swept wing works. But there was a lot of times playing this thing, I would attribute maybe 1/5 of my deaths, maybe 20 deaths out of 100, to turning horizontally, rolling and pulling elevator, and the wing just falling off at maybe about 1,000 to 1,100 kilometers an hour. And this got so annoying when it came to the vehicle. It got very annoying, And I didn't, this was when I didn't have boosters. I never install boosters on jets, even though I know some of them are fine with installing boosters on. I just don't do it. I've had too many bad experiences when it comes to pulling hard. So I didn't research the boosters modification on the F-14 was the last one I researched, basically, or very close to, and I uninstalled them straight away. I don't like using boosters on these vehicles. So it wasn't that. It was just the fact that pulling at a horizontal, rolling an elevator at around about those speeds, your wing would just snap off. It was as if when it was automatically trying to move the variable swept wing from an angle to a straight, it would just rip the wing straight away, and then you would be done. It was super annoying, and it actually meant that instead of doing those horizontal loops, I started to do more 45-degree vertical loops. That solved the issue, and also just trying to be very, very careful with doing those turns, while even turning afterburner off and just kind of nudging it around as I went. So that was very annoying when it came to the vehicle. That was super annoying. But that was really the only big frustration, I suppose, I had with the vehicle. Everything else wasn't too bad for it. The 20mm was super nice. The radar, I suppose, was a bit frustrating, but then again, that seems to be an issue with all radars, not just this one. This is one of the better radars in the game, and it had, you know, its issues. A lot of people talked up the TWS mode. The TWS mode for me was useless most of the time. The TWS is very much designed for if you have Phoenixes. And if you want to use them, but Phoenixes don't fit the meta, so there's not really much point in using it. And the way that missiles work, like the IR ones, especially the AIM-9Gs and the AIM-9Hs, what they'll do is if you lock onto a target that you are trying to set up for, or you're warming up the seeker head, what will end up happening is the seeker head will lock on to the target which you have radar locked. And with TWS, because you lock a bunch of targets at the same time, the seeker head can go for a bunch of vehicles that you don't want it to go for, and you can't set up properly with the Sidewinder itself. So TWS and AIM-9Hs or AIM-9Gs just doesn't work properly if there are multiple targets in the area. There is no use in using it. The other ones, so you've got Pulse Doppler, and then you've got, I think, PDV was the one, and then also just the search. So for me, what I did was I changed between the search and the PD. But at the end, I just ended up just using the PD. So the thing about the TWS, as I said, locking onto multiple targets at once, no use. The search radar, there was too much clutter in it. Even at higher altitudes, it struggled. The PDV, which is the one which works more on, I believe, speed instead of distance, this one can't actually distinguish between friend and foe. So basically, if you have a bunch of targets in front of you and a bunch of them are friendly, you're not gonna know if they're enemies or not, unless you can actually see them when it comes to the actual names. And so therefore, the search PD, the Pulse Doppler one, that's the one that I had the most success with, and that's the one which served me the best at high altitude, and then also going down into the fight after the high altitude battles. So I would recommend using that one. Unless you're using Phoenixes at the start of a battle, then use TWS for a little bit, and then switch to the search PD. That really served me very well. And I think going forward, I'm going to use flares and mixed, basically flares and chaff with this thing, or flares reinforced, depending on what the meta looks like. But it is very obvious this plane is incredibly good. As a person who doesn't play a lot of 11.3 games, the fact that I can come into it and do as well as I did, compared, to what other people were trying to do in their aircraft, shows that this vehicle is an incredibly good one right now. It is definitely meta-defining at this point. Does have a few teething issues, but not any huge ones, and was fantastic to fly once I got those useful missiles. So once I got the AIM-9Gs and the AIM-7F, this thing came alive. Before that, it was just horrific to play. And then when I got the engine upgrade and the G-suit upgrade, it just felt really good. So pretty much after 2 days of spading it, then it actually became really nice. But before then, it was just naff. And as I said, that's one of the major issues with War Thunder as itself. When it is, when you are, halfway through a vehicle or a quarter of the way through a vehicle, you can kind of feel its potential, feel its performance, but it doesn't feel great because of the issues it has. But once you get to the end of it, once you get to the fully spaded sense, you feel like a god. And that's how the F-14 feels. I feel like in this meta I would hate to spade a bunch of other 11.3 vehicles right now because of the F-14 and because of how dominant it is. Even in the F-14 it was a bit rough when in that first 100 kill area. But got myself the loading screen, got myself this thing spaded, and also overall just had a pretty decent time. So I'll take that. I'm pretty happy with that overall. But as always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Nicholas Richardson, Elove Goat, Pyman675, Winter Scientist, Merciless Reaper, Jerry Prevolt, Megadino King, Orange Tail, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Moxie, B. Young, Uncle Bean, Sem Arslan, Derek R., Bareen, Lafouche, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.